Okay, so picture this. You're with the family, game night's happening, everybody's excited, the Monopoly box comes out, the
Yeah.
drill, someone's going to get bankrupt. It's all in good fun.
Yeah, sounds pretty American, right?
It does, doesn't it? It's practically a tradition at this point, but what if I told you that this game, the one we associate with the American dream, actually started as a way to criticize capitalism?
It's funny how things turn out, isn't it? You think you know something like a childhood game, and then bam, history throws you a curveball.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to do today. Dive deep into the world of Monopoly, a woman named Lizzie McGee that most people have never heard of, and how a game meant to challenge the system well became a huge part of it.
It's a story full of twists and turns for sure.
So to really get this story, you have to meet Lizzie McGee. Now, this was a woman ahead of her time, independent, outspoken, and passionate about social justice.
She was born in the late 1800s, a time when industry was booming, but so was inequality, which, wasn't great.
Yeah, not exactly a recipe for a fair society.
And her dad, James McGee, was a progressive through and through. He even traveled with Abraham Lincoln during the Lincoln-Douglas debates.
Wow, so politics and social issues were basically dinner table conversations for her.
You could say that. It definitely shaped how she saw the world. Her dad instilled in her this strong sense of fairness and a real skepticism of people getting rich just from owning land.
So is that where the single tax theory comes in?
Exactly. It was a big deal in Lizzie's life. This economist, Henry George, was pushing this idea. Instead of taxing people's hard work or their businesses, you just tax land ownership.
Interesting. So Lizzie's thought was, if you own land, it shouldn't just make you rich because you're sitting on it. It should benefit everyone.
That's the heart of it. And this is where Lizzie gets really creative. She gets that games can teach people things. They can make complicated ideas like economics fun and easy to grasp.
Ah, so that's why in 1904, she patents the landlord's game, basically the granddaddy of Monopoly. And get this, she actually makes two sets of rules, one for monopolists, which is kind of like how we play today, and then another set for anti-monopolists that rewards players for sharing the wealth.
It's brilliant. It's like she built a choice right into the game, two paths for society to take when it comes to wealth and land.
What I find fascinating is how the game spread. It wasn't some big ad campaign. People just started playing it, making their own boards based on their own cities.
Right. It really shows how much the game resonated with people. It wasn't just a game. It was like a reflection of their lives, their communities.
It had that DIY spirit, people
Yeah.
taking something and making it their own. But like with any good story, there's a twist. Enter Charles Darrow, an unemployed engineer who stumbles upon the landlord's game, and, well, his involvement changes everything. So Lizzie's game is spreading like wildfire, but then along comes Charles Darrow. What's the story there?
Well, it's the Great Depression times are tough, jobs are scarce. And Darrow, this unemployed engineer, he's trying to figure out his next move. And one day a friend shows him this game, the landlord's game.
Ah, I see where this is going. He sees this game and thinks, hey, I could make some money off this.
You got it. He sees the potential, redesigns the board, and takes it to some of the big game companies trying to sell it.
So classic entrepreneur sees an opportunity and goes for it. But wait, didn't Parker Brothers, the company that made Monopoly famous, initially reject him?
They did. Can you believe that? They passed on the game that would become a global phenomenon.
It's amazing how things that seem so obvious in hindsight weren't so clear at the time. So how did Monopoly end up taking off, especially during the Depression? It seems counterintuitive.
You'd think so, right? But remember what was going on then. People were struggling, losing their jobs, feeling hopeless, and here comes this game promising riches and success. It was the perfect escape.
So they were selling more than just a game. They were selling hope, the American dream.
Exactly. And they crafted this whole narrative around Charles Darrow, the struggling engineer who invented a best-selling game. It was a story people wanted to believe in.
Right, because anyone could be the next Darrow.
Yeah.
Anyone could strike it rich, even during the Depression.
Precisely. But the thing is, while Darrow certainly played a role, the foundation of the game, the core idea that came from Lizzie McGee.
So Lizzie's contribution gets overshadowed by this rags to riches story.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like her invention was erased from history.
That's sadly what happened. And it wasn't until decades later that someone else, a professor named Ralph Ansbach, enters the scene ready to uncover the truth about Monopoly's origins.
Ah, yes, Ralph Ansbach, the Monopoly mythbuster. What's his deal?
Well, he was this quirky economics professor, a bit of an outsider, the
Yeah.
type. And he had this fascination with games and this deep distrust of big corporations.
So for him, it wasn't just about the game itself. It was about the bigger picture, the impact of monopolies on society.
Absolutely. And his story picks up in the 1970s, a time of social change and growing concerns about corporate power.
So Lizzie's concerns about monopolies were still relevant decades later.
Exactly. And what does Anspach do? He creates his own game called Anti-Monopoly.
Talk about a direct challenge. What was the game about?
It was all about breaking up monopolies, encouraging players to fight against corporate control.
I bet Parker Brothers loved that.
You can imagine their reaction. They weren't thrilled. They hit Anspach with a cease and desist, basically telling him to stop selling his game.
Wow, talk about trying to protect your own monopolies.
Yeah.
So what did Anspach do?
Well, he wasn't one to back down. He saw this as an opportunity to expose what he called the monopoly lie. And in the process, he stumbles upon Lizzie McGee's patent.
Whoa, that's a huge discovery. He must have been floored.
He was. It was like finding a missing piece of history. Suddenly it all made sense. Parker Brothers had been building this whole myth around Darrow, and Lizzie McGee was the forgotten genius.
It's like he stumbled upon a conspiracy almost. So what did he do with this information?
Anspach wasn't just a professor. He was a detective on a mission. He traveled all over the country interviewing people who played the game before Darrow's version became popular. He was collecting evidence to prove that Lizzie McGee was the real inventor.
So he's literally digging through history trying to piece together the truth.
Exactly. He even tracked down the couple who taught Darrow the game in the first place, and they were shocked when they heard Darrow was claiming to be the inventor.
So they confirmed that Darrow didn't come up with the game himself. He learned it from someone else. That must have been a key piece of evidence for Anspach.
It was. He was building this whole archive, a treasure trove of Monopoly history, all dedicated to Lizzie McGee's legacy. And all of this led to a huge legal battle with Parker Brothers, a fight that would last for years.
Wow, talk about David versus Goliath. He took on a corporate giant to set the record straight. So did he win?
Well, despite all his efforts, the Supreme Court ultimately declined to hear his case.
Man, what a blow after all that work.
Right.
This felt like a huge defeat.
It was a setback for sure, but you know what? His efforts weren't completely in vain. Because of Anspach, Lizzie McGee's story wasn't completely erased anymore. People started to know her name and her contribution to this iconic game.
So even though he didn't win the legal battle, he won in the court of public opinion. He rescued Lizzie McGee from obscurity.
Exactly, and that's pretty powerful. It shows that history isn't always set in stone. Dedicated people like Anspach can challenge the official narrative and bring forgotten voices back to life. But even as the truth about Monopoly's origins was coming out, the game itself was changing. Its relationship with capitalism was becoming even more complex and layered.
It's wild, isn't it, how a game invented to critique capitalism became so well capitalist.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how we relate to these systems, you know?
Yeah.
We criticize them, but we're also part of them.
It's almost like Monopoly makes capitalism fun, in a way, turning cutthroat competition into a family game night.
Right. I mean, you're bankrupting your relatives and everyone's laughing. It's all good fun. It makes you wonder, though, does knowing the real story, Lizzie McGee's story, change how we see the game?
I think for me, it definitely adds a new layer to the experience. Like while I'm rolling the dice, I can't help but think about Lizzie and her vision for a more just world.
And that's what's so captivating about this whole thing. It's like Monopoly went from criticizing capitalism to symbolizing it, and then back to being this tool for social commentary during Occupy Wall Street. It shows how even the games we play can reflect these deeper societal tensions.
Yeah, it's crazy how the Monopoly man, the guy with the top hat and the mustache, became an icon for the 99%.
Right. He became the symbol of everything people were protesting against: corporate greed, the wealth gap. It's almost like Lizzie McGee predicted the future. I mean, we're still dealing with these same issues today, whether it's big tech or the housing market.
It really is like history repeating itself. And Monopoly just keeps reflecting that.
And what's even more interesting is that even with all this baggage, Monopoly is still one of the best-selling board games of all time. People just can't get enough of it.
I get it. There's something addictive about that whole wheeling and dealing aspect.
Yeah.
But do people even think about Lizzie McGee when they're playing? Or is it just a fun way to pass the time?
Probably not everyone, but that doesn't mean it's not important. I think even if they don't realize it, there's something about that gameplay that taps into our fascination with wealth and success, even if it's just pretend.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And then you have things like the Monopoly at McDonald's promotion. It was everywhere.
Exactly. You had to collect all those little game pieces. It was brilliant marketing, but it also cemented Monopoly's place as this symbol of consumerism.
Which, again, is kind of the opposite of what Lizzie McGee was going for.
Totally. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the most important thing about Monopoly is that it gets people talking. It makes us think about these issues, even if it's just a casual conversation during game night.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Monopoly, what's the one takeaway you hope our listeners remember?
I'd say it's this. Games are more than just games. They can reflect our culture, our values, our fears. The next time you play Monopoly, take a minute to think about Lizzie McGee, her vision, and the wild journey her game has taken. It might just change how you see things.
Great advice. And who knows, maybe it'll even inspire you to challenge the status quo in your own life. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the history of Monopoly. It's been a fascinating ride.